Hey guys, welcome to the Babbling Pastor Podcast, the absolute bestest, the awesomest podcast on the internet, the Babbling Pastor Podcast with your host, Michael, that'd be me in case you don't know, and
Rob.
Roberto. Hello, Roberto. So today, if you were with us last week, I teased that it was sort of part one to a part two. And I guess you could say yes, no to that. We'll find out as we talk through it. There's a lot of stuff I want to talk about in this episode that really ties in to the last episode. I don't really want to waste any time getting into it because I'm assuming we hooked you really well during that last episode, and that's why you're here. So why waste your time? Also, some of you have commented that the first 5 minutes is a waste, and I don't appreciate that. So we're going to get right into there's been people, I guess I'm doing it again. There's been people that leave in the comments, episode starts here, and they leave the timestamp because we talk so long at the beginning.
Look, the amount of podcasts that do that is like 98%. Okay.
Yeah.
So
it's fine.
just, they'll get over it. It'll be all right.
Yeah. All right. So last episode, Rob brought in a clip of
Zoran
Mandami. I lost his name for a second. And we talked a little bit through that. Now, in connection to that, so I got super interested because what we didn't talk about last time is that he is what is classified as, he would classify himself as a democratic socialist. And so I got really interested in like, all right, so again, just to break down the stats, he technically barely won New York, but it is still significant that he did. But it was like, I think Siwa or something was his name, was the Republican candidate. Him and Cuomo kind of split evenly between the two of them. And if you would have added up what they both got, basically that conglomerate would have tied Mandami. And so it's like a 50-50 split basically in New York if you add up how the votes work. Now, all that being said, is that he says he's a democratic socialist. So I got really interested as far as, okay, the category, like the age range of people, as well as the gender of people, was pretty telling in New York, meaning that a lot of younger voters, those that are like 30, 35 and under, heavily voted for Mandami. Whereas like the older boomers voted for one of the other two candidates, or even some millennials. And I thought, well, that is really intriguing. Also, one of the things that was intriguing is women pretty strongly voted for Mandami as well. Now, there's again, depending on what chart, I don't want to get too much into that because depending on what chart you're looking at, men did too. So it just kind of depends, I guess, on exit polls. But it got me really interested. How is a younger generation responding to socialism? And then in regards to this podcast, how do we as Christians and as leaders in the church sort of interact with how younger generations are perceiving or interacting with socialism? Because obviously, one of the things I think we can tell from Mandami is that there's at least a swing that way. Right? Is it significant? Is it not? Lots of discussion. We're not a political podcast per se. And so who knows? But it is interesting as far as how those two things sort of come together within the church. It was really interesting. So here's a self-serving my tweet that we can discuss. So I looked it up because I was so interested. And there's about 4 or 5 different campus surveys that were done, ranging between 2,000. The average seemed to be about 2,000 people they asked. And of those 2,000 people, they sort of projected out. So again, this is how surveys and statistics work, in case you don't know. They'll survey a smaller population of people and then sort of project that onto the larger one based on the statistics they find in a number of smaller surveys. And so altogether, the surveys basically said this: 62% of Americans within the 18 to 29 age range hold a favorable view of socialism. Now, I have to be careful here because I didn't define it in the tweet so much, but in the survey, when they asked these college kids or up their view on socialism, they didn't define it. They just sort of let how the person they're asking, what they already had, the definition of socialism was. Yeah, their perception was. So it's not like they defined it. So they're not making distinctions between democratic socialism as a general thought process. They're just asking people. And 62% of those people between 18 and 29 held a favorable view. Now, my comment underneath led to kind of the survey's sort of understanding of why. One of them was they just misunderstand the definition. Like the way they're thinking about it is like public services, perhaps. The other one was that a lot of people, when they asked them why they didn't have a favorable view of capitalism, it was because they had a negative view of the US. Like they just had a negative view of America. And then the other one was they had no real knowledge when asked about like, Mao's China, or when they were asked about Cuba, or when they were asked about Venezuela. None of them really had a working history that they could explain how those countries connected with the idea of socialism. So the survey's idea
Funny,
is sort of to, huh?
funny how that goes
Yeah.
together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So to summarize and to sort of prime the conversation, so 62% of 18 to 29-year-olds had a favorable view of the general idea of socialism. And it seemed to be primarily because they didn't have a favorable view of the country they live in, nor did they know the history of other countries in which socialism is often connected to. So, priming that as a pastor, which obviously has younger families, a lot of people within that age range, or a lot of people that may visit within that age range, what are your initial thoughts about this?
Okay, so my what I need to preface my initial thoughts about it by saying that I live in a pretty red situation. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so that does exist here for sure. You know, there are a lot of young people. I would even say, particularly in that are still in high school, right? Like that age, which is before the age range you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I live in a very blue collar kind of. I mean, everyone. There's a lot of oil field ranching, hardworking kind of folks, and by nature, those kind of people um, are going to be in favor of less government programs, right? Because I'm working 14 hours a day in the oil field. So what's
Mm-hmm.
your problem? Right. It's how this is kind of how a lot of people think.
Yeah.
Um, so that should be prefaced, um, but I do think, I mean, you hit on what I think is the biggest problem, and that is they're just ignorant.
Mm-hmm.
That they're ignorant of what socialism is, where it came from, how it's functioned. They'll hear um, uh, one incredibly edited side of this argument. And we tend to, this is one of the reasons AI can be really uh, difficult.
Yeah.
We tend to just want to hear affirmation to what, like what, if it sounds good to me,
Mm-hmm.
that's the one that I'm going to believe, right? Um, and I think that if people tend to not have a real good response to if you lived if you went abroad and lived in any country that doesn't pursue a couple of socialistic things, right? But that is socialist, right? If you went abroad and lived in a country that has lived under socialism or communism, or I mean, they're like kissing cousins, right? Um, or close brothers and sisters. But if you went abroad and lived for 6 months, you would run back to America, right? Um, it's because we've grown. The very fact that you can stand out and protest
Mm.
uh, and not fear for your family or your life necessarily or whatever, right? Like that very fact, um, like you, it just displays such an ignorance of reality and what socialism actually produces.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, um, there's not an understanding of like the Frankfurt School or where socialism comes from,
Mm-hmm.
right? The worldview behind it. Um, and certainly, if you're an unbeliever, the worldview behind it wouldn't necessarily be a problem, I guess. Uh, uh, but but I would say one of the things that I think needs to stop, um, and this would just be coming from me as a pastor, I think, to my congregation and any congregation would be there tend to be what you said, what, 18 to 29.
1829.
That's
Yep.
the So there tend to be a bunch of 40-year-olds and 50-year-olds and 60-year-olds who are like, these dang kids don't know anything about, and whose fault is that,
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
what I would say, right? Like you raised them. Whose
Mm-hmm.
responsibility is it or was it to train them and teach them,
Mm-hmm.
not just, like you depended on the public school system, like to teach your children
Yeah.
everything they needed to know, and probably didn't intervene or have
Mm-hmm.
conversations with them, or
That's
look at their
key.
social studies book and go, oh, wait a minute, this
Yeah.
isn't right. Like
I
this is,
remember
you
I
need to own
remember
it.
my grandpa and grandma. I remember my mom's mom and dad. We lived close to them, and I remember a couple times as a kid where, and I don't know why. Maybe it stands out so sharply because it just took me off guard so much. But I remember we were learning something about the Great Depression, and my grandma was a kid, like she was a young kid, but she was a kid. And I remember during the Great Depression, and I remember saying something, and she says like, "That's a bunch of crap," and I like it was just interesting to hear like. It took me off guard as a kid, first of all, because my grandma didn't talk like that a lot, but also because it was just interesting to be like, yep, but that, like, my teacher taught me that. Like, that's what my teacher said. And my grandma just subverting all the total, like, no, well, she's wrong. And then being able to explain, like, I lived, like, I remember as a kid this, and doing these things. And it was just really interesting to hear that. And the same thing to some extent with the whole communism thing. I remember, again, by the time we came around, that was all gone as far as like the trials and the talks and stuff. But my grandma and grandpa lived through all of that. And so it was really interesting. They didn't talk about that a lot, but they talked about that a little to where,
Mhm.
I mean, I remember it being a thing. And so it is really interesting that you bring that up, that it's like, how often did you mention? And I've noticed that a few times. I don't know if I told you this or not, but Haley had a class on early Christianity, and she knew I'd be really interested into it, so recorded the class. Well, she records all of them, but she sent me that voice memo, and I was listening through it one day when I was going to go visit her, because she had asked me what my thoughts were, and I hadn't had a chance to listen to it yet, and I was listening to it on the way up to talk to her, and like three things: the professor, like the guy that's getting paid to teach you the truth, verify, like, this is an opinion. It was verifiable things that I could point to in documentation, like actual things that I can be like right here that he got wrong. And I'm like, this is crazy that like you're sitting here telling these kids certain things about early church history. And I could show, like, he talks about how, one of the things was, I'll just say, I know this has nothing to do with what we're talking about, but it's a good example. He talked about how at the Council of Nicaea, the books of the Bible were decided, and then they sent out the canons. And I was like, that's verifiably incorrect. Like what it demonstrates to me is that he has read in passing what was done at Nicaea, but doesn't actually understand the verbiage. There were canons sent out, by the way, but canon also means like command or like the law. And so they sent out like they did send out some, but they were sending out laws to the local churches like this is what you shouldn't do or this is what you should do, not canons as in this is the Bible. And it was just so I was screaming in my car by myself. I was just so mad. I paused it and I just punched the ceiling because it was like you are getting paid to teach people something that is verifiably wrong. And then you're going to test them. Like they're going to have to write an answer on a test that is incorrect, but it's because you're the one grading this. Then now to get a grade, they have to lie on a test to get a point. And it's just like, this is insane. And I think it goes back to what you're talking about in regards to I think we have to intervene as again, you can't just be like, dang kids in socialism. Okay, have you told them how it's wrong? Have you demonstrated via the math, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it does come down to one, and this is where, I mean, full disclosure here, I've had to educate myself on a lot of stuff based upon the feedback I get from people online that I just don't know. I don't know what the answer is to it. And I hope to get a little bit into that in this episode because I think it's very interesting. So before we get to that point, though, let's get back to yours. So I think education is one of the first things, right? As far as us saying, hey, have you looked over here at this burning pile of crap country? And it's not just me saying that. People that have literally fled from that country are saying that about their own previous country.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I think that does start with it. Was there anything else you would add to that other than just educating people?
No, I mean, I think that is so where we have failed to educate, we need to accept responsibility for that.
Mm,
Because I think that one thing that will do, right? I think so. This 18-year-old person who is favorable towards socialism isn't stupid,
mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And I think that if I see the holes that I've created, let's say, in not speaking about it, um, and particularly this aversion that Christians tend to have to speak about anything that's political, right? Um, if I uh, accept that responsibility, now I'm actually going to have a better set of lenses on to talk about it at all, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now I don't think they're stupid. I just think they need to learn,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like they're missing knowledge, and that's not the same thing as just being an idiot,
Yeah.
right? Especially when parents have abdicated their educational responsibilities in large part to the school system. And I don't just mean public schools, I mean generally.
Yeah.
Christian parents that send their kids to Christian schools ought to be involved in that and paying attention. And I think, I mean, I could talk about this for a
Yeah.
long time. I won't, but the sending your kids to, people treat the church the same way, right? Like sending your kids to youth group and expecting the youth pastor to be their pastor
Yeah.
instead of dad first being the priest of the home, and preparing them for if they're going to go to college. So I have one that I would be surprised if he ever attends college because he's just already got his thing going on with work and he's learning
Mm-hmm.
a lot, and it's more like an apprenticeship thing. And then I have one that he might do some college coursework kind of stuff. Um, so I'm going to prepare them differently a little bit, right? But I have a responsibility to ensure that when he's met with it, this first year general education garbage of
That's not
where
untrue. That is 100% accurate. Yeah.
yeah, in a lot of colleges, um in a lot a lot of colleges, in even increasingly so-called Christian colleges, they're going to be met with professors who are trying to undo their biblical worldview,
Mm,
like
yeah.
specifically
No, that's true.
attempting to undo the biblical worldview. So I need my son, what that means to me is I need my son to go into that classroom knowing what this fool is going to present as an argument, knowing where he's wrong and why he's wrong, and with the boldness to say, I think this is where you're wrong. And if it gets me an F, it does.
Yeah.
Right. Um, and like, it's weird how we don't make the connection with all these young people leaving the church when we've not prepared them. And
Yeah.
so, of course, your kids are going to think socialism makes sense because they don't
Yeah.
freaking know anything about it.
Well, also, I think it comes down to you're talking about like educating yourself and knowing things. I think part of that too, what I've noticed before we kind of move on to the next part of the conversation, I think part of that is also being able to critique your own worldview. Because one of the things that happens, I think, often, or at least this is how I've seen conversations almost always go between a number of just all the conversations I watch online and in person conversations, is that
Hmm.
typically you'll have two people with opposing views and they'll just berate each other on the other one's views. And sometimes they will be somewhat knowledgeable of the other person's views, which is why they hold the position they hold and why they're able to sort of poke at certain things. What I very rarely ever see is someone able to critique their own view and be like, no, this is the holes in my view, but I still hold it because it's patently better than the other options. And I think what that does, at least it does two things. One, it allows you to be able to be honest about the worldviews you hold and where maybe there are shortcomings in them or where maybe they don't align fully with what your core beliefs are. And two, it enables you to take a position that almost never is going to be taken by the person that is critiquing you, which is the ability to actually say, yeah, there's some issues here. Because most of the time, whenever somebody's arguing with, they're dead set on like in this case, no, like this is the only way to go because your way sucks. And I think it's helpful again not to give ground. You're not in my opinion, you're not giving up ground as much as you are just saying no, like that. What you said there is technically correct about my worldview, but this is still why it's better. And being able to come around to the other side of it. To be like, I still think you're wrong and I still think I'm right. But I mean, there are holes in this argument. But I think, again, it comes down to, and this is what I've noticed. I'd like to pick your brain on this before we move on to the next part. But like what I've noticed is um, I have the great potential to waste an enormous amount of times on things that don't matter when I could be wasting or not wasting, investing that time in actually helpful things. So in regards to this conversation, I have the option every day to come home, veg out, and not and just do nothing, just relax. Or I have the opportunity to invest a portion of that time into saying, well, what is in this case we're talking about what is democratic socialism, and at least have a better idea about what that is, so that when inevitably these conversations will come up, I can actually been like participate in a beneficial way rather than just being noisy about things that don't matter. What's your
Hmm.
thought on that? Like, as far as, do you, I guess in general, do you think we as a people or Christians, because this is what kind of our idea, our spheres we're talking about here. Do you think as Christians we've been taught to do that, to wisely invest our time in like intellectual, knowledgeable things, or is it? It's kind of hard to, I guess, generalize that, but
Well, I think you bring up actually a point that could be an entire episode,
fair enough.
because um, yeah, I think that in principle, maybe in words, we get taught that from pulpits and whatever, or we get taught that we ought to, right, steward our time like we are taught to steward our money or whatever. Time is not different, and we talk about that, right, as Christians, but putting it into practice is a completely different thing, right? And um and so I think that um some of the demons of our age would be uh, regarding this, or let's say at odds with this, would be social media generally. Um, all of the our bent toward being entertained, right? So the death scroll, short videos, right? Or um, watching, like binge watching your favorite shows, whatever. Like, and that actually does. You don't have to. You can search, even online, even secular people in the medical brain kind of neuroscience world can talk intelligently about the effects of that, and it's not good. Your brain, right, being just entertained all the time, starves for more of that, and slowly but surely
You
you're
mean this
like you're
isn't
not.
helpful? This isn't helpful?
Yeah, it's definitely not. um and 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 so you um it becomes, let's just say it becomes even more work to do mental work than it ought to. um we so people used to um do more, actually get those endorphins, let's say, from doing mental exercise, from problem solving and getting to a conclusion or whatever it might be. Um, and now the thing that feeds our um, good feeling, right, from in our minds, is entertainment. It's not having to do mental exercise, but just be entertained by the world around us, um, and that's been, I mean, that's a death sentence if a person um, doesn't get past that and actually use your mind and think about things. So that's why I say that could be an entire episode, because I think that
Yeah.
you hit something really important. We Yeah, in maybe um, theology, we are taught about this and even called to it, um, but in practice we neglect to, like, look at, okay, then what does that mean, and
Yeah.
what ought I to change? It's one thing to use social media, um, to see what the world is saying, see what the arguments are, come up with solutions. What is real and true, which is increasingly more elusive,
Hmm.
um, and that's one thing, right? Like, there are good. I don't want to paint the picture that all of it's bad. Like, there are very good things that social media brings us. It's not different than the printing press, right? Like, that's produced countless Bibles, uh, and 50 Shades of Gray, right? So,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
so I I think that yeah, we need that mental exercise.
Hmm.
We need to use our minds, and get back to the point where discovering new things or whatever, like putting in that work,
Yeah.
is actually the thing that gives us that, oh, that's awesome, right?
Yeah. And again, I don't know how to necessarily implant that in people's brains other than to show them how beneficial that is. Because here's the thing: whenever one of the things I love to do, and I know, whatever, question my motives all you want, internet people. One of the things I love to do is to specifically say something that I 100% hold to be true, and then wait for the yeah buts to come in. Because what's helpful is, and this is why, because I know I don't know everything about that. I mean, I hold a
Hmm.
position, but I know I probably don't know every aspect of what's going on. And so, one of the interesting things is that the yeah buts give me an opportunity to go figure stuff out. Like, okay, I
Hmm.
haven't thought about that thing before. So on that topic, so what we're talking about is the tweet specifically about the 62. What did I, hold on, let me come back over here. 62% of Americans within 18 to 29 hold favorable views of socialism. So one of the things is that was very interesting. I've already talked about Venezuela, Cuba, Mao's China, that stuff. Obviously, these are failed examples of socialism. No question about that whatsoever. But what I found is people, at least on this particular post, were saying things like, yeah, but what about the Nordic countries? They have democratic socialism involved. Now, I want to do a pop quiz. Now, Rob, this is not to put you on the spot, but I am putting you on the spot. So these countries, the Sweden, Finland, Iceland, Denmark, or all the Nordic countries, all of them have what would be classified, not technically as democratic socialist countries, by the way. They're called mixed economies. And the difference in that is that a mixed economy has higher taxes in order to support social programs. So America technically would be considered a mixed economy, though not to the extent of Denmark and Sweden. To give just one example, again, something I had to learn, we have about a 23% tax rate. They have double that, 43. And so there's a lot of things that support their societal sort of welfare things. Taxes are part of it. So all that to say, one of the things that people will point out, though, when I bring up this idea that, alluding to the idea that socialism is bad, whether it be democratic or otherwise, is that, yeah, but what about these countries? So I want to do a pop quiz for you, Rob, just really quick, just so we can get some information out here. Now, with these countries, what do you think? Obviously, in America, we have, if you become a citizen, you come and you just on a visa. If you want to participate in our country, obviously English is the required language, or like the language that everyone speaks. But
It
if
ought
you're
to
a
be.
citizen, you don't necessarily have to speak English. What do you think the language requirements for these countries are? In these countries that democratic socialism actually, quote unquote, works in, what do you think their language requirements are?
Man,
Strict or strict or loose?
all you're going to demonstrate is my ignorance. I don't know.
No,
Um,
okay, no,
I, I,
good.
I would assume that there's some sort of requirement to speak the language of that country.
Yeah, yeah. So in this, and again,
Yeah.
these are just Google. These are not in-depth things. These are just quick. I wanted to give people quick Googleable things. So
Googleable.
language integration, yeah, language and integration requirements for naturalization have been tightened in all of these countries in recent
Integration.
years. Yes. So for example, in Sweden, citizens are required to pass certain language and civil tests. So the idea is that obviously we in America, we have, you have to pass a test to become a citizen, but there's this idea that you have to become a naturalized citizen, which means if you come to our country, you have to become part of our country. This is how we
Hmm.
act. This is what we do. This is our heritage. You have to accept and become part of that. So what do you think their immigration policies are?
Immigration policies. Oh my gosh.
Yes.
I mean, that's a big topic, but I would assume since you're bringing it up that um, that their immigration policies are probably well, first of all, they exist, which is different
Yeah.
than maybe a democratic socialist would argue in our own country.
Okay.
Uh, and they're probably pretty tight. I mean, just based on
Yes.
the first
Yes.
statistic, the first thing that you brought up, just based on that, I would assume that, I mean, it's already more than we require. We
Mhm.
no longer require a person to be, naturalized.
Yeah.
It's almost like, yeah, bring your whole culture with you and live in it.
Yeah.
Don't worry about ours.
So
So
according to this, and again, this is I'm saying according to this because you can Google this, but I've looked up a lot of this as well. But according to Google, many Nordic countries have progressively restricted their immigration, especially starting in the 80s and 90s, leading up to today, on immigration, refugees, and their integration policies that they require for both. And so it is very hard. I don't know if the statistics is on this Google thing, but there is. I think I could be wrong. I'm sure you can. I don't have the data. I have it on my notes on my other computer, but it's either Sweden or Denmark. I think you have to live there for 9 years before you can become a citizen, because they want to make sure you are totally ingrained within the society, understand how it works, are participating, are actually involved and rooted before they will give you citizenship. Because they want to make sure that if you come into this country, you are a part of this country.
You're one of us.
You're one of us. And so they have incredibly strict language guidelines as far as, it's not that you can't speak other languages, but the idea is this is the language that we speak and we will use, as well as if you're going to come in here, there are progressively restrictive, I don't necessarily know how tight, but progressively restrictive immigration policies in regards to how you do that, or how you come in. And so those two facts I think are really interesting. There's more. You can obviously Google. There's all about different trends, and all these trends, by the way, are trending toward immigration, and how these countries have seen that affect not just their country. Again, remember, we're talking about democratic socialism. If people are gonna hold up this idea that Sweden, Denmark, Finland, and Iceland are like these successful countries, we then have to ask the question: what makes them successful? And one of the things that kept coming back when I looked this up was that they have a national identity of, this is what we believe, this is how we act, this is how we're going to interact with one another. And if you want to participate in this, then this is how you must do that. Now, ingrained in that, by the way, is part of their, if you're going to live here and take advantage of our social system, you have to give back to our social system. If you are going to participate in this, you have to understand why you're participating in this. Also key here, which is why I think that it's really easy to throw out this idea, yeah, but look, these are successful, is that all of these countries that I've mentioned have operated or grown out of, and this goes back to our last episode, smaller countries that were agrarian, that were tight-knit communities, in which that idea of how you take care of people in your community progressively grew into a national identity of, we treat everyone as if we were living in the same community. That is entirely different than what you have as just an ethos within America. And so one of the things I think, and I just did that entire exercise to point out this idea, that I think you have people, and it goes back to your first point, you have 18 to 29-year-olds that get told, well, yeah, but Sweden, Finland, Iceland, Denmark, they all work as socialist democratic countries. Like, we can do the same thing. And they lack the idea that to actually do what they do in their countries in America, I mean, it's innumerable the things that would have to change in regards to immigration policy, in regards to national identity, in regards to its scale. Scale is, first of all, one of the biggest things. I do have that. Let me just as an example you have a population in America. Do you know, I didn't know how big this was. Do you know what our population in America is?
It's like 300 million something, right?
332 million people in America. Yeah. Do you know how big Norway's population is?
Not 300 million.
5.4 million people.
Okay.
And so even
like one of our major cities, I suppose.
Yes. Yeah. And so if
Yeah.
you take the just of Norway, Denmark, and Finland and combine them together, you still only have about 7 million people, give or take. And so what you have is also a scale problem. And so one of the things I think, you're going back to talking about just educating ourselves and those people within that category, I think part of it, and this is where I would say it ties into Christianity, right? As a Christian, how do these two things cross over? As a Christian, I want to be as honest as I can be about how I'm dealing with the world and how God set up the world, which is why it goes back to our last episode where you brought that up. And I think as a Christian, when we're talking about this, I have to be educated and say, there's a lot of because of the roads that we have gone down in abandoning God's way has led us to a position now where you want a utopia without the actual utilities to implement even the bottom shelf of that utopia. Because you want all the candy without having to go out and trick or treat is what you want. I mean, you don't want to put in it's just it's crazy. And so I just want to throw that out as an interesting sort of thought exercise that I think it proves a couple things. One, I think we're all fairly uneducated on kind of the world we live in and how it works. And we all also like we want the best thing without understanding how do we even get there? Or and not that Denmark, Finland, and Iceland have the best thing, by the way. There's some very interesting things in regards to how those social programs work. But um, we want the thing we don't have without even understanding how you would get there. And so, as a Christian, I think we have to be really honest about that. And the ironic thing, and I'll shoot it back to you, if you guys saw the last episode with Mandani, the interesting thing is Mandani is promising a democratic socialist city without having the implementations and utilities to provide that built in already that those countries that he says are successful have. New York does not have an identity out that is centralized or the same. Their goals are not the same. They do not have a people that have an identity that is to that end. And so, again, your goal and your culture is mismatched in such a way that it doesn't work. But people will vote for it because low rent. So
Yeah. Yeah, I think that assimilation is a very key um, subject that in the whole grand scheme of what we're talking about now, and um, the I mean we're in the predicament at this point in our own nation, right? Like it's too late to say, well, we ought to just write A, B, and C.
yeah,
Um,
for sure.
And I think it's ironic that some of the very things that have created uh, good things about these other Nordic countries are things that don't match socialism. Okay, so that's number one. I think number two, one of the problems um, that so the scriptures there is there's no world in which you can make the argument that assimilation isn't expected, right? This was true in Israel in the Old Testament, and it's certainly true no matter what kind of the liberal so-called Christians might say today. It's certainly true of New Testament, God's people in the New Testament as well, right? Otherwise, Paul and Peter and James and whoever would not have written a single letter because there would be nothing to change. The very
Do whatever you want,
fact that
guys.
Right. The very fact that we have sanctification as an important doctrine in the church means assimilation to God's kingdom. It means you have changing and conforming to do, right? And so I think that the on a grand scope, the big problem that we're faced with now in our own nation is, I've heard the argument, well, if those other countries are so great, why are all the people coming here that want to, and it's like, well, the reason for that, okay, at least one major reason for that is now first of all, they get to, right? That they're coming to a country where the actual attraction seems to be you don't have to assimilate, right? You get the free stuff, you get the opportunity, and you have to put in no work to become part of, right? We don't have a national identity. We don't, I think that the people, there's a big group of people who are finally being vocal and attempting to regain a national identity that we once had. But I mean, we're a long road away from a whole bunch of the country having any sort, like the national identity is in some part that you don't have to assimilate. Like the national
Yeah.
identity is we don't need a national identity. Um, and like
Or
we've
the national identity is hate the old one.
yeah, yeah, right, yeah, for sure. Um, and so I think um, it would be maybe a government program I could get behind is every uh, every person when they graduate from high school has to go live in Venezuela for 6 months
I had a I had
and come
I had a
back.
guy comment that he's from Venezuela, and he commented that he goes, "Hey, just send them down here to me. They can live
Yeah,
with me
there
for a
you
little
go.
bit." Yeah,
Yeah,
he's like they won't like it. So yeah,
yeah. I think I mean, um, in large part, it comes down again to education for sure. But you know, we're in we're in such a predicament now that it's going to take nothing less than a miracle from the God of heaven to fix. I mean, and by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, I got to hear John MacArthur preach live one time at a Ligonier conference, and the whole premise of his message, I think it was from Romans 1, and the whole like the one liner of his message was it's too late.
thanks
And I mean,
thanks for the encouragement. Yeah,
speaking specifically of like the like America and where we are morally and whatever. um and I won't forget that. It was quite the statement to make. But and he wasn't wrong. I mean, from the standpoint that like what policy do you introduce to fix that right away? Like
yeah,
like
yeah.
we're
No,
we're
it's true.
about we're about 500 policies deep in things that we need to just eradicate and completely get rid of, and we're about 500 policies away from, and these fools can't even open a government up. You know what I mean? Like this isn't going to get fixed. um it's a miracle of the Lord if we're making headway in it with this. So I
Yeah,
think the
you
church.
want you want the people that can't run a government to fix your problem? Okay.
Yeah, yeah. But good thing that there's no problem too great that got like too big that government can't solve. But I
Except
think
a vote. Yeah, you can't vote.
yeah, right. Yeah, yeah. Um, well, yeah, I mean, you can, even if you're dead. It's just that
Yeah.
when yeah, uh,
Anyway,
when you're in Congress, right? But but so from a very basic church standpoint, right? Like what can my local, like what does this mean for
let's
me,
narrow it
right?
in. Yeah.
My particular um the first thing that I would say is don't lose heart, because like the kingdom that you belong to, first and foremost, not of this world. It's not like the Lord has all of a sudden lost control because America's, because America has diarrhea right now, right? It's not as though things are out of his control. He's very much sovereign, so it's fine. Um, so you don't have to have anxiety about it. But then I would say we live in a world where you can get news almost instantaneously from Mongolia, right? And so I think we need to just bring it in, right? Focus on your local church. Focus on educating. Get over your aversion to being quiet about politics and to politicians. That's important. Um, but also, don't be an ignorant fool about it, right? You need to know what you're talking about if you're going to engage in those spheres. Um, and And then get busy. I mean, I don't know. There's nothing else that the church can do but get busy. Talk to your legislators where it makes sense to do so, and go like volunteer at the food bank and use discernment when you're giving and all of those things. Like you just need to be the church, right? And let things fall where they may.
Yeah.
Do what is my dad used to say, do what's before you. Um, and that's a line that will probably always stick with me. Do what's right in front of you, and that's where your focus needs to be.
Yeah. No, I think that's good. The one thing that, just as an ending on my part, I think the one thing that I think we can all take away that's super important is you like know what kingdom you belong to, and work toward that end. Because here's the reality. I think is there will be discouragement that comes while
Oh
you're
yeah,
doing those things, because you'll have conversations that just don't seem to go anywhere. You'll talk to legislators that you'll learn that are actually more incompetent than you could have ever imagined. And there will be things that don't go the direction you want, along with all of the good things too. And so, really, one of the things is I think just be balanced in your perspective, knowing that you belong to a king, you belong to a kingdom, and his kingdom will and does reign over everything, and eventually all sin will be put under him. And so, or what you see, he'll come back and he'll fix it.
yeah.
And so, just working to that end. So, I think that's helpful in the discouragement in that part. So, all right, guys. Well, hopefully, I didn't mean for this to be another long episode, but welcome to another 50-minute episode. Thank you, guys, and we'll talk to you next time.
Cheers. Bye.